The Atlantic coast of Maine had a way of getting under your skin, deep into your bones. For John, an ex-Air Force communications specialist who'd seen more than his share of classified briefings and hushed transfers, it was a welcome, if brutal, change. The salt spray, the endless roar of the waves, the isolating beauty of the jagged coastline, it was a stark contrast to the sterile, windowless rooms where he'd spent most of his adult life. He'd taken the job as a lighthouse keeper on Monhegan Island, an ancient, weather-beaten granite tower perched precariously on a rocky outcrop, precisely because it was the last place anyone would look for him. Or so he thought. His predecessor, a grizzled old man named Silas, had left abruptly, leaving behind only a terse note about needing solid ground for a while and a half-eaten can of beans. John had found the job posting through a peculiar, off-the-books government contractor, the kind that handled sensitive logistical support for various unnamed agencies. It paid surprisingly well, required no direct contact, and promised utter solitude. For a man trying to outrun his past, it was perfect. The lighthouse itself was a marvel of antiquated engineering, its cast-iron spiral staircase winding endlessly upwards to the lantern room. But there was something about the light itself that John found unusual. It wasn't the typical incandescent beam he remembered from maritime charts. This light was a pure, almost crystalline white, with a subtle, almost imperceptible hum that vibrated through the very core of the tower. It pulsed with a hypnotic rhythm, casting its brilliant, cold glow across the churning, ink-black ocean. One stormy night, a week into his new post, the hum intensified. The entire lighthouse seemed to thrum with a deep, resonant vibration that made the windows rattle in their frames. John, used to the routine of the sea, knew this was no ordinary storm. He climbed the winding stairs to the lantern room, the metallic tang of ozone filling the air. As he ascended, he noticed something odd. Tucked into a small, almost invisible alcove beneath a loose floorboard near the top, he found a small, leather-bound journal. It was old, its pages brittle, clearly not part of the standard lighthouse inventory. He carried it back to his living quarters at the base of the tower, the hum still resonating through the stone. Sitting at a rough-hewn wooden table, with the storm raging outside, he opened the journal. The first few pages were standard weather observations, ship sightings, and mundane notes from a previous keeper. Then the entries began to change. November 17, 1957. The light is different tonight, not the usual pulse. It has a structure, a pattern, like it's trying to speak. My sleep is troubled. The dreams are not my own. December 4th, 1957. They came today, not by boat, not by air, from the water. Tall, silent forms, shimmering in the spray. They looked at the light. They looked at me. They are not human. My orders say to observe, never to interfere, but what if the light is meant for them? What if I am meant for them? John's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a journal. It was a secret history, and the cryptic orders and light spoke of a hidden purpose far beyond guiding ships. He looked up, his gaze drawn to the window, where the crystalline beam of the lighthouse cut a path through the swirling rain and mist. Out there, in the churning darkness of the Atlantic, something was stirring, and the light was calling it home. John sat frozen, the roar of the storm outside a distant echo to the storm of revelations crashing through his mind. They came from the water. The words, penned nearly 70 years ago, felt as real and immediate as the cold stone walls around him. He forced himself to keep reading, his fingers tracing the faded, spidery script of the unknown keeper. January 11, 1958. Found the primary access panel behind the maintenance locker. My predecessor left a mark. Inside, it's not a lamp. Not in any human sense. The core is a single, massive crystal, flawless and dark, that pulses with its own internal light when the generator runs. The gears and mechanisms around it are modern, but the heart of this place is not from this world. I read the project file before I came here. Project Beacon. They said it was a prototype for a new kind of naval guidance system. They lied. This is not guidance. It's a summons. March 22, 1958. Lost time again. Was winding the clockwork for the rotation mechanism. Looked at my watch, it was 8 p.m. The next thing I knew, I was standing at the base of the tower, drenched in sea spray, and my watch read 1 a.m. I have no memory of the 5 hours in between. The light was humming a different tune when I came to, a lower, more melodic frequency, as if it had finished a long conversation. A shiver traced its way down John's spine. Lost time. It was a term he'd heard whispered in hushed tones during late-night debriefings in the Air Force, always in connection with UAP encounters and pilot testimonies that were quickly buried in classified files. He slammed the journal shut. He had to see for himself. Grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight, he battled his way up the winding staircase, the wind howling a mournful song through the ironwork. The air grew colder as he ascended, and the omnipresent hum of the lantern intensified, resonating in his chest. In the lantern room, the storm was a terrifying spectacle of nature's fury, yet the crystalline beam cut through it with an effortless, unwavering intensity. He located the maintenance locker mentioned in the journal, a heavy steel cabinet bolted to the curved wall. Behind it, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a section of the wall that didn't quite match. Prying it open with a crowbar, he revealed a dark cavity filled with complex machinery. And there, at the center of it all, was the heart of the lighthouse. It was exactly as the journal described, a massive, deep violet crystal, the size of a man's torso, suspended in a complex gimbal of polished steel and brass. It wasn't faceted like a diamond, but smooth and organic, its dark depths swirling with faint milky nebulae. It pulsed with a soft, rhythmic heartbeat that was the source of the tower's hum. This was not a lens. This was an engine, an artifact, a piece of alien technology humming silently in its cage of human engineering, patiently sending its signal into the infinite dark. He reached a hand out, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand, and brushed his fingertips against the crystal's cool, smooth surface. The moment he made contact, a single, clear image flooded his mind. Not a thought, not a memory, but a feeling. The cold, crushing emptiness of deep space, the silent wheeling of distant galaxies, and an overwhelming, ancient sense of loneliness, and a feeling of anticipation, the feeling of a long journey finally nearing its end.
John yanked his hand back from the crystal as if burned. The sense of cosmic loneliness and anticipation faded slowly, leaving a disturbing residue behind. This wasn't just a piece of equipment, it was a consciousness, dormant, patient, but utterly alive. He descended the stairs and returned to the journal, but this time he flipped forward several decades, searching for another keeper's entries. He found a different handwriting, dated 1982. July 1982. I relieved Martin last week. He was pale and silent, only said one thing: "Don't listen to the ocean. It started talking back." I understand what he meant now. The signal has changed. It's more complex, a dialogue. Sometimes, when I stand at the base of the tower, I can hear an echo, not from the rocks, but from the deep. A low, melodic hum rising from the water, as if an answer to the light. August 1982. The guests returned. Saw them last night at low tide. They were standing on the wet rocks, 3 of them, tall, slender silhouettes against the pale moonlight. They didn't move, just watched the tower. I could feel their attention like a physical pressure. These were not the same beings the first keeper wrote of. These were different. Or perhaps they were the same, but changed. The light isn't just calling them home, it's changing them. And I'm afraid it's changing me, too. John put the journal down. His gaze fell upon the old shortwave radio in the corner, his only link to the outside world. On a sudden impulse, he switched it on and began to slowly cycle through the frequencies. Most channels were filled with crackle of static, the distant voices of fishermen and weather reports. But then, on a very low frequency, he heard it. It wasn't a human voice. It was a rhythmic, low-frequency hum, rising and falling like the slow breathing of a whale. It was incredibly deep, on the very edge of human hearing, but the melody was unmistakable. It was the same echo he had felt from the crystal, a signal coming not through the air, but from under the sea. He moved the radio closer to the window, and the signal grew stronger. It was coming from the ocean. Suddenly, the hum cut off. There was a moment of perfect silence, and then a clear, mechanical voice spoke from the speaker, in English, but with a strange, inhumane cadence. Beacon 7 1 4. Calibration received. Awaiting arrival. The voice ceased, and the deep hum returned. John lowered the radio, his hands trembling. This wasn't a random transmission. It was a status report. Someone, or something in the depths of the ocean, was using the lighthouse's signal for calibration, and they were preparing to welcome the ship he was calling. He wasn't just a keeper. He was an unwilling participant in a cosmic rendezvous decades in the making, and the curtain was about to rise. Awaiting arrival. The words echoed in John's mind, chilling him more than the frigid Maine air. He wasn't just maintaining a beacon, he was a gatekeeper, an unwilling usher for an event that had been set in motion decades ago. And whatever was awaiting arrival was now calibrating its instruments, drawing ever closer. Sleep was impossible. John spent the rest of the night poring over the journal, frantically searching for any clues, any warnings, any way to stop what was coming. He found entries from the 1990s, another keeper, a woman named Sarah. Her writings were less fearful, more analytical, almost scientific. May 12th, 1993. The deep hum is now constant. It vibrates through the bedrock. I've been tracing its source using hydrophones. It's not coming from a single point, but from a vast geometric structure submerged off the coast, about 3 miles due east. It's enormous, too precise to be natural. The light isn't just calling, it's communicating with the structure, preparing it. The guests aren't just visitors, they seem to be tending to it. June 3rd, 1993. I've observed them from the cliff during low tide. They are truly magnificent, these guests. Tall, slender, with skin that shimmers like mother of pearl in the moonlight. They move with an ethereal grace, They dive into the water near the structure, staying submerged for hours. They are not merely observing, they are building or reactivating. The structure beneath the waves is waking up. John closed the journal, his mind racing. A submerged structure? It made a horrifying kind of sense. The entities hadn't just visited Monhegan Island. They had established a base, a staging ground, using the lighthouse as their primary communication array. He grabbed a pair of high-powered binoculars and climbed the spiral staircase once more. The storm had begun to subside, leaving behind a thick, swirling mist that clung to the surface of the ocean. He adjusted the binoculars, sweeping them across the choppy gray waters 3 miles due east. At first, he saw nothing but the endless expanse of the Atlantic, veiled by the mist. Then, as a gust of wind briefly parted the fog, he saw it. Just beneath the surface, a vast, dark mass, impossibly geometric and utterly alien. It was a sprawling network of interconnected structures, like an inverted city, but made of something that seemed to absorb all light. It lay perfectly still, a silent, colossal shadow in the deep. It was far too large to be natural, too intricate to be anything but constructed. He could discern faint pulsating lights within its depths, like the slow, rhythmic beat of a submerged heart. As he watched, a section of the mist directly above the structure began to shimmer, as if the air itself was distorting. For a moment, the fog thinned further, and he saw them. 3 tall, slender figures standing on a partially exposed outcropping of the submerged structure. Their forms seemed to ripple with the mist, their skin faintly iridescent in the dying light of the storm. They were looking up, not at the lighthouse, but to something far above, beyond the clouds. They were tending to the structure, yes, but also waiting. And then, above them, a new light appeared. Not the steady beam of the lighthouse, nor the distant glow of a star. This was a soft, expanding luminescence, high above the clouds, slowly growing brighter. It wasn't moving in any discernible direction, just appearing, like a tear in the fabric of the sky, letting through the light of another world. The long journey was definitely nearing its end, and John, the reluctant lightkeeper, was about to witness its terrifying conclusion.
The light in the heavens grew, no longer a soft luminescence, but a brilliant, silent tear in the night sky. It pulsed in perfect synchronization with the lighthouse beam and the deep thrumming from the submerged city. The entire island vibrated with the harmonized frequency, a low, powerful drone that resonated deep within John's chest. Through the binoculars, he saw the slender, iridescent figures below raise their long arms towards the sky, not in worship, but in preparation, like engineers ready to receive a delicate and vital component. From the rift in the clouds, something began to descend. It was not a ship of metal and lights. It was a colossal shard of what looked like obsidian, a mountain-sized, perfectly geometric crystal, identical in material to the heart of the lighthouse. It fell without sound, without fire, absorbing the very light around it. Its descent slow, majestic, and terrifyingly absolute. It was not landing, it was docking. The submerged structure was its cradle, and the lighthouse was the final key. John lowered his binoculars, his knuckles white. The journals of the past keepers flashed through his mind, their fear, their resignation, their passive observance. For 70 years, a chain of men and women had stood guard, watching, recording, and silently enabling this moment. His own vague orders from the contractor echoed, "Observe, never interfere." He was just one more cog in a machine he didn't understand. But as he watched the colossal shard descend, a lifetime of military training, of taking action, of refusing to be a sitting duck, surged through him. He couldn't fight it, he couldn't stop it, but he would not be a silent witness to the end of his world. He would not just watch. He had one weapon, the light itself.
With a newfound, desperate purpose, John turned from the spectacle and scrambled down the iron staircase, his boots clanging in the vibrating tower. He didn't stop at his quarters or the journals. He ran straight to the generator room at the very base of the lighthouse, a cramped space filled with the smell of diesel and the roar of the powerful engine that fed the alien crystal. The plan that formed in his mind was reckless, suicidal, and born of pure defiance. The keepers before him had only ever maintained the system. They had followed the rules. He was about to break the one rule that mattered. He wasn't going to turn the light off. He was going to turn it up, all the way up. He stared at the main conduit, a thick, insulated cable running from the roaring generator directly up into the tower's core. Beside it was the primary regulator, a heavy industrial lever designed to prevent power surges. The warning label, stark in red and white, read, "Danger, do not bypass." Bypassing it would send a raw, unfiltered torrent of energy directly from the generator into the alien crystal. What would happen? Would the crystal shatter? Would the lighthouse explode? Or would it unleash a chaotic, uncontrolled blast of its own energy, a final, desperate broadcast that would disrupt the arrival? He didn't know. The entire tower gave a violent lurch as the descending shard drew closer. Dust rained down from the stone ceiling. Outside, the world was ending or beginning, and he was the only one who could throw a wrench in the works. With a guttural yell that was lost in the engine's roar, John grabbed the heavy regulator lever with both hands, planting his feet for the strain. He was just a keeper, but he would not let the light be delivered without a fight. With a grunt of pure effort, John forced the heavy regulator lever past its safety lock, pushing it all the way down. Sparks showered from the console, and the generator's roar surged to an ear-splitting shriek. The entire lighthouse shuddered violently, protesting the raw, uncontrolled power coursing through its ancient frame. John braced himself against the wall, his teeth rattling. Upstairs, in the lantern room, the crystal heart of the lighthouse screamed. Its soft internal glow exploded into a blinding, searing violet light that pulsated erratically, no longer a beacon, but a weapon. The humming, which had been a precise, rhythmic thrum, devolved into a chaotic, discordant shriek, a cacophony of frequencies tearing at the fabric of the air. Outside, the effect was immediate and catastrophic. The colossal obsidian shard, which had been descending with serene majesty, suddenly wavered. Its perfect geometry began to distort, ripples of energy passing over its surface like water. The glowing rift in the clouds above it flickered and convulsed, as if struggling to maintain its form. Down on the submerged structure, the iridescent figures recoiled. Their slender forms seemed to flicker, their pearlescent skin losing its shimmer, becoming transparent for fleeting moments. They threw their long arms up, not in preparation, but in what looked like agony or confusion, their movements becoming jerky and disoriented. The hum from their submerged city also broke, sputtering like a dying engine. John watched from the generator room, his eyes squinted against the blinding flashes of light from above. He could feel the crystal core pushing back, fighting against the overload, but his desperate gamble was working. The perfectly harmonized frequency was unraveling. The finely tuned signal was being drowned out by static, by noise, by pure, unbridled power. He heard a high-pitched crack from the lantern room, followed by the terrifying sound of splintering glass. The lighthouse light, no longer a focused beam, began to spray wildly, arcs of violet energy lashing out into the night sky, striking the ocean, the cliffs, and even momentarily engulfing the distant obsidian shard. Each lash of energy seemed to make the descending object stutter, slow, and then impossibly begin to ascend, fighting against the violent disruption. The entities on the submerged structure were now desperately trying to counter the chaos, their shimmering forms coalescing into a single, pulsing mass, as if attempting to re-establish a stable frequency. But it was too late. The surge was too great. With a final ear-splitting scream from the crystal, a massive wave of raw energy erupted from the top of the lighthouse. It was not a flash, but a silent, expanding sphere of pure violet light that engulfed everything in its path: the thrashing ocean, the rocky coastline, the struggling figures on the submerged structure, and the colossal obsidian shard high in the sky. Then, just as suddenly, it vanished. The generator sputtered and died, plunging the lighthouse into complete darkness. The silence that followed was absolute, deeper than any John had ever known. No hum, no roar of the ocean, no wind, just a profound, heavy void. He stood in the pitch black, gasping for breath, the smell of ozone and burnt electronics stinging his nostrils. He was alive. The lighthouse was intact, somehow. But what about the rest of the world?
A silence held for a minute, then two. Slowly, as if the world were waking from a profound slumber, the sounds began to return. First, it was the whisper of the wind, then the gentle lap of waves against the rocks. Normal, terrestrial sounds. The hum was gone. Utterly. John, trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion, fumbled in the darkness for his flashlight. Its beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the quiet, scorched generator room. The regulator was a melted slag of metal. It had done its job. He made his way slowly up the stairs, each footstep echoing in the newfound silence of the tower. His quarters were a wreck from the vibration, books and papers scattered across the floor. He went to the window and looked out to the east. The ocean was calm. The thick fog was dissipating, and in the distance, where the submerged structure should have been, there was nothing but the gray morning waves. No shimmering figures, no eerie light from the deep. His gaze shot to the sky. The storm clouds were breaking, revealing a pale, rose-colored dawn. The rift in reality, the gargantuan obsidian shard, all of it was gone, as if it had never been. He ascended to the lantern room. The glass was shattered, and in the center, in its complex cage, sat the crystal. It no longer glowed. Its deep violet color had faded to a smoky gray, its smooth surface now covered in a web of fractures. It was dead. Just a rock. On the floor, near the base of the crystal, lay the last journal, the one kept by Sarah. It had been blown open to the final page, a page John hadn't reached. Her neat script was different here, hasty, jagged, as if written in the final moments. September 1993. They know. Somehow they know I understand more than I should. They've shown me not the future, but the purpose. They are not conquerors, they are architects. The arriving crystal is not a weapon, it is a heart. A new heart for their sleeping machine in the ocean. They don't want to destroy this world, but restart it, rewrite it in their own image. They believe they are saving it from us. Perhaps they're right, but it is not their place. There has to be a way to break the harmony, not to kill the signal, but to corrupt it, an overload. Perhaps then. The entry ended there. John lowered the journal. He had done exactly what she had theorized. He hadn't just severed a connection. He had shattered the very heart of their plan. He didn't know if he had destroyed them or merely sent them back into the void to wait another 70 years or perhaps forever. He looked out at the sun rising over the calm ocean. For the first time, the air felt clean. He was just a man in a lonely lighthouse on the coast of Maine, the keeper of a silent tower. His past no longer mattered. The secret government program would likely fall apart with its primary asset now inert. He was free, but he knew he would never leave this island. Someone had to stay. Someone had to watch, just in case the ocean ever decided to talk back again. He
was the lightkeeper, and though the light was out, his watch had just begun. 6 months passed. The Maine summer bloomed in all its rugged beauty, but for John, the seasons now held a different meaning. They were merely markers of time in his new, unending watch. Silence had become his constant companion. The profound, natural silence he had first welcomed as a relief had, over time, become something else, a presence of its own. The absence of the hum was as tangible as its presence once was. He had repaired the lighthouse as best he could. He replaced the shattered glass in the lantern room, cleared the debris, and brought order back to his quarters. The dead crystal remained in its place, a silent, fractured monument to the night the world almost changed. The government contractor who had hired him never once made contact. His pay continued to arrive in his bank account each month, no questions asked, as if they were afraid to know what had happened. Or perhaps they did know, and his silent confinement was part of the deal. One evening, while inspecting the rocks at low tide, John noticed something new. On the stones where the guests had once stood, strange, pale blue lichens were growing. They grew in fractal patterns reminiscent of star charts and emitted a faint, cold light in the twilight. The energy wave from the lighthouse hadn't just severed a connection. It had left an imprint, a faint echo of another world on the very geology of the island. That same week, the boat arrived. It was a small, nondescript fishing trawler, but it moved with an unnatural precision. It stopped 100 yards from the island. A lone figure emerged on the deck, a woman in a dark suit, her face obscured by the shadow of a hat. She made no attempt to land. She simply stood there, watching the lighthouse through a pair of binoculars. John watched her from his lantern room. He felt no fear, only a tired curiosity. After several hours of silent observation, the old shortwave radio he had repaired crackled to life. "Keeper," a calm, female voice said, devoid of all emotion. It was her. "We are registering a total cessation of emissions. Project Beacon is considered concluded. Your duties, however, remain unchanged. You are the quarantine officer for the Monhegan Zone. No further instructions will follow. End of transmission." The boat turned and slowly disappeared back into the fog. John lowered the radio. So, that's what he was now. Not a keeper, not a guardian, a quarantine officer. His job wasn't to call something in, but to ensure nothing got back out, and that no one found what lay here. They hadn't abandoned him. They had simply reassigned him in a game whose rules he still didn't know. He looked down at the pale blue lichens on the rocks, glowing in the dusk. His watch hadn't ended that night. It truly had just begun.
2 years passed. The seasons blurred into a monotonous cycle, each marked by the slow, creeping spread of the pale blue lichens. They now covered the eastern rocks of the island in a sprawling, silent tapestry of cold light. John maintained his watch, his existence pared down to its essentials: eat, sleep, observe, report. His reports were simple, sent once a month over the shortwave radio to an operator who never replied. Monhegan Zone secure, no change in status. The isolation had honed his senses. He knew every rock, every tide pool, every cry of the gulls, which is why the flicker of a small, unauthorized boat on the western horizon one afternoon sent a jolt of adrenaline through him he hadn't felt since the night the light died. It was a small, civilian motorboat, and it was struggling. Puffs of black smoke sputtered from its engine. It drifted closer, at the mercy of the current, until it inevitably ran aground on a small, pebbled beach on the far side of the island, away from the glowing lichen field.
A single figure, a young woman with a determined look and a backpack full of scientific gear, jumped out and dragged the boat ashore. John watched her from the cliffs, his hand resting on a heavy wrench in his pocket. He was the quarantine officer. No one was supposed to land, but his orders were vague, and his humanity, buried under years of solitude, stirred. She didn't look like a threat. He confronted her as she was trying to fix her engine. Her name was Dr. Eris Thorne, a marine biologist from the University of Maine. She claimed her engine had coincidentally died while she was studying migratory bird patterns. John knew it was a lie. Her eyes kept drifting towards the eastern rocks, the source of a faint, anomalous energy signature she had likely picked up from a distance. "You shouldn't be here," John said, his voice rusty from disuse. "My engine failed," Eris retorted, her gaze unwavering. "And this is public land, unless you're claiming squatters' rights." He couldn't force her to leave, not without revealing a hand he was meant to keep hidden. He allowed her to stay, reluctantly, warning her to keep away from the eastern cliffs due to unstable rock formations. For 2 days, a tense truce held. Eris worked on her engine, and John watched her, a silent, brooding shadow. On the third night, she broke the truce. John awoke with a start, a strange feeling in the air. The deep silence of the island was different. It was vibrating, a low, almost imperceptible thrum returning for the first time in years. He ran to the lantern room and looked down. Eris was standing at the edge of the lichen field. She had a scanner in her hand, and its readings were clearly off the charts. The pale blue lichens, normally a soft, steady glow, were now pulsing with a bright, rhythmic light. And they were all pulsing in sync, their light focused on a single point in the center of the field, a spot where the original guests had stood. As John watched in horror, the light intensified, and the very air above that spot began to shimmer just as it had 2 years ago. John scrambled down the stairs, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He burst out of the lighthouse and ran towards the glowing field. The thrumming grew louder, a familiar resonance that made the ground tremble. The lichens weren't just reacting to her scanner, they were reacting to her, to a new, unfamiliar human presence. "Get away from there," John yelled, his voice raw. "It's incredible. It's a bioresonant network. It's responding to my equipment's frequency." As she spoke, the shimmering air in the center of the field coalesced. It formed a shape, not a physical being, but an echo, a memory imprinted on reality. It was a tall, slender figure made of pure, pale blue light, identical to the guests from the journals. It was featureless, silent, and it turned its head to look directly at Eris. The thrumming intensified into a single, high-pitched tone. The ground shook. Eris stumbled back, dropping her scanner, her scientific curiosity instantly replaced by primal terror. The light form took a step towards her. John didn't hesitate. He ran in between them, placing himself directly in the echo's path. He didn't have a weapon. He didn't have a plan. He only had his post. He was the quarantine officer. "Leave," he said, his voice low and steady, speaking not to Eris, but to the shimmering apparition. The creature of light paused. It tilted its head, as if considering him. For a moment, John felt that same ancient consciousness brush against his mind, not from the crystal this time, but from this lingering ghost. It felt different now, not vast and indifferent, but faded, confused, like a recording playing on a loop. It was looking for a signal that was no longer there. He stood his ground, an immovable object against a forgotten force. After a moment that stretched into an eternity, the light form shimmered, its cohesion failing. It dissolved back into the air, the high-pitched tone faded, and the lichens returned to their soft, steady glow. The silence, his silence, returned. Eris stared, speechless, her face pale in the moonlight. She finally understood. This was not a scientific discovery. It was a tomb, a scar, and he was its eternal guardian. The next morning, she had fixed her engine. As she prepared to leave, she looked at John with a new respect in her eyes. "I won't tell anyone," she said softly. "The world isn't ready for this." John simply nodded. He knew she wouldn't. She had seen the ghost in the machine, and it had seen her. He watched her boat disappear over the horizon. He was alone again, but something had changed. The silence no longer felt like an absence, but a presence he actively maintained. His watch was not a punishment, but a purpose. He turned and walked back towards the lighthouse, its dark, silent tower, a monument to a promise he would keep until his last breath. He was the lightkeeper, and even in the darkness, the watch endured.